and welcome to Fantastic Beats. 3 people, 3 tracks, we swap them and we talk about them. I'm Lizzie Maris.
I'm Jack Chuter.
And our brilliant guest today is Jeanette Leech. Jeanette is the author of Fearless, The Making of Post-Rock, and also Seasons They Change, the story of acid and psychedelic folk. But I also want to say in her bio, which is one of the best bios I've ever read, she's a fan of girl groups, hard-ass lady funk, and novelty songs. So hi, Jeanette, best guest ever.
Hello, Lizzie. Hello, Jack. And
Hello.
I will try not to fall flat on myself after that amazing introduction. Thank you.
All right. So, Jack, do you want to kick us off today then?
Yes. So the track that I chose today is by Broadcast. It's called I Found the F. So Broadcast, a band from Birmingham, consisting at the time that they released this song, I think primarily of Trish Keenan and James Cargill. And this is the first track on their album Tender Buttons, released in 2005, which is an album I picked up, I believe, around the time it came out, maybe a couple of years later, after I saw them at Supersonic Festival. And in fact, I've not really checked out any other Broadcast material, but it's something that is definitely on the kind of my radar to do at some point. It's kind of a bit shameful that I haven't already. But basically, this song is one of my absolute favourites, and it's a beautifully simple song. It has like 2 chords and just a simple driving beat, and it feels like, because it's the first track on the record, it's just rousing the instrumental palette of the album as a whole. So you've got these like really rich, quite partly distorted drums, you've got bass and guitar, you've got these low fidelity synthesizers, which sounds like that they're pulling heavily from old games consoles. And then obviously you've got Trish Keenan's voice, which is like smoke. It's this effortless kind of half awake tone. It's beautiful. It moves in these incredibly smooth, kind of unforced glides as she's going through the track. And what I love about this piece of music, and I think it strikes you first when you first hear it, or it did for me anyway, but still remains as you listen to it further, is that it feels kind of deliberately incomplete. It's just this one section that lasts about, I don't know, a minute just over, that then repeats and then just peters out, and that's it. And it's got this one chord that holds on for what feels like far too long in my book, and doesn't resolve, and again just opens out. And I just love the way that it sets up the whole record. It feels like it's withholding something, but maybe that's something that then gets given to you later in the record. I just think it's fabulous. And lyrically as well, it feels quite vague and again quite withholding. I always feel like it's about sensory experience, but I don't know. And that's quite a nice thing, that I'm still wrapping my head around this song after so many years. So I love it. Lizzie, what do you think?
Yeah, the intro is definitely from or inspired by, and I can't place it, a kids show from like the 70s or the 80s, like a BBC children's theme tune, or it might go ding, glang, glang. It's the sound. I'm not quite sure what that is at that beginning, that instrument or synth or whatever it is, but it really made me instantly go, oh, this is that kids show intro thing.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's quite old. It's got black and white in my mind. I'm not sure where it's from. I really like it. I really like the vocals. I wrote down Janis Joplin, kind of loose groove at the start. And when you listen to some kind of festival recordings of her, they've got this kind of loose groove where it's all just hanging together, but it is hanging together and it really works. And her voice is kind of hazy, and it sounds like, this whole track sounds like it could be from the archives, but then it kind of betrays itself because it's too clean to be authentically from any archives.
Yeah,
so you
sure.
know it's a kind of modern-ish song. Is it
2005.
Yeah. So I really like that about it. It feels nostalgic, and I was thinking about the singer, and I was thinking, if you're watching that singer live or you were in a room with her, she'd definitely be quite misty-eyed, and I don't think she would look at you. I think she'd kind of look past you into the distance, because it's kind of got that far away, ethereal, lax kind of quality to it, but it's very nice, and it's also present at the same time. It's not kind of unknowingly so. Yeah, I really liked it. I am just so intrigued as to what that sound is at the beginning, because it was like a very visceral response to me. I was like, whoa, childhood. The TV's on, this show has started, so I'm really intrigued as to what that is. Yeah, nice song. Jeanette, what did you think?
Well, it was really interesting that you said, I think it's from a TV show, but I don't know what it is. Because I don't know either. And I wonder if it really is from a TV show. Because, like, the thing with that song is it feels like it's like false memories being planted in your head somehow. That there's like, of course, there's this kind of retro quality to it, but it's also not. It's kind of unsettling, which is an aspect that I really like about that track, and I really like about Trish and her voice as well. And when you mentioned like a children's show from the 70s, weirdly, or the 80s, or some kind of past, it was almost also like it had been beamed in from Eastern Europe or something, that it was kind of bounced off something or other, that you, like in the old days, in terms of watching TV, if you couldn't quite get the tuning right, it would go and you'd get snow and something would come up and it would be like this broadcast song, and you would see something that you wouldn't really understand, and then it would be gone again. And there's that kind of wispiness to that song, which is kind of it's got a rare poetry to it that I really, really like. And I do know broadcast work a bit, not hugely, but I do know them. I primarily remember when they came out and when they were on Warp, and it was kind of a odd thing because they were a lot warmer than a lot of other bands on Warp who sort of made coldness a bit of a virtue sometimes. And Trish and her voice didn't. They had that kind of warmth that almost came from psychedelia. You felt there was that colour to them that's still, I think, really, really nice to them. And I remember also that they got slated in the early days in the press for being this kind of record collection rock, which sort of Stereolab also got slammed for.
Okay, yeah.
But I think that's really unfair. I think broadcast do something that's got a lot more value to it than just being the sum of their influences, basically.
It's also, it feels quite naive, really, in a world, doesn't it? Because it's like, so many bands are like that. I think it's if you pull from certain sounds, isn't it, that suddenly you get that accusation thrown at you. Certain sounds seem like touch points in the past where it's like, no, you can't use that without suddenly being like a band that's looking in the rear view, which is a bit unfair.
And it bothers me because, like, the only authentic things are it's like that Jack White thing is if you do it on the first take or whatever, which is like absolute nonsense. You don't get the complexity. I mean, sometimes you do, sometimes you capture a rawness, and I appreciate that. But what sort of bothers me about that sort of, we need it raw, we need it this sort of raw emotion, I think that's way too simplistic, and bands like Broadcast capture complexity of emotion that bands who do it on a one take and have that as their like almost guiding ideology don't get.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, totally agree. I think it's quite an easy thing to kind of say as well, like, oh, well, this is how we work. It's like, oh, it just so happens that that's also quicker, easier, and you don't have to put in as much work. Interesting.
Everybody wins.
Yeah. Just give it some welly for half an hour. Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to our second track. Now, Jeanette, it's your track.
Yes,
I can't wait to talk about
this one.
Yeah. So I picked Scooter from the Muppets, and it's a song called There's a New Sound. So it's actually a cover version. So the original song, this version of the song, the Scooter version, was released in the late 70s. But it was a cover of a song from the 1950s by this guy called Tony Borello, who was this kind of weird... He was a jazz pianist. I think he was quite serious. And then he was like, right, there's no money in jazz. And he was just like, right, I'm going to make a novelty record. And he made it, and it was... What I love about novelty records, and Lizzie, you read it out in my bio, and I think I'm on a total novelty records jag at the moment, so that's why I picked this, is that at their best, and I think the 50s and the early 60s in America are just like the golden era of novelty records. There's a real surrealism to them. They're not exactly kids' records, they're just weird. And There's a New Sound is like one of those records, and if you listen to the original, there's definitely this kind of beatnik strangeness to it as well.
Yeah.
But I picked the Scooter version because I was a huge Muppets fan when I was a little girl. I had the bedspread and everything. And those songs are still very, very dear to my heart. And the reason why I find it sort of quite lovely, really, is that Jim Henson, creator of the Muppets, was such a record nerd, and he knew all these strange novelty records. So before the Muppet Show, there was sorry, this is so nerdy. There was a series that he did called Sam and Friends, which was on local TV in America, and it basically consisted of prototypes of the Muppets, just like miming along to various novelty songs.
Yeah.
So at the time, it was a contemporary of the song There's a New Sound, because it started in the mid-50s. And what I love about the Muppets is he totally kept that sensibility. He kept that weird sensibility. There was no reason why Jim Henson would have thought, oh, this will make a good thing, to have this strange novelty record that no one ever remembers. And what made it even weirder is that this was only shown in the UK, this particular. So there was like even no, in the tiny cultural history it had, nobody in the UK in the 70s would have known this record. But what's weird about the record is just the whole thing is just, there's a new sound, the newest sound around. It's the sound that's made by worms. And that's pretty much the whole song. It's so odd. It's so, and it's got little sound effects of the worms and a bird and a jungle lion. And I just find it utterly charming. It sets off just a lot of good childhood vibes for me, but it also sets off this weird surrealism, which I think is there in the best novelty records. And I thought a lot of people probably wouldn't be sort of so much aware of that, because the Muppets isn't shown so much anymore, and people don't really know that kind of history of the Muppets. They just think of it as like Miss Piggy and Kermit, which is really, really amazing. But there's a whole musical history to the Muppets, which I think is really, really ripe for rediscovery. So that's why I chose it.
Nice. I mean, wow. Lizzie, you take on the Muppets baton here, because I feel like there's a lot of great enthusiasm going, and you're the one to take it forward.
You're right. I am so there with you on the loving of the Muppets. So, two things. I feel Sesame Street taught me everything I needed and still need to know in my life when I was young, and I'm still working from that. And another thing, I'm so obsessed with puppets, and indeed the Muppets. Every time I hear like a sort of background chorus piece in a song, in my mind, the chickens are singing it.
Oh, yeah.
And they're swaying left to right, and they're singing it. So I mean, that's how far this goes. So I was absolutely delighted when you picked this, because I hadn't heard it, and everything you said so much better than I could was just so bang on. Like that, the Muppets was so well researched, and everything they did was, even though it looks so silly and playful, there's so much intent in everything they do, and there's so much knowing parody, and there's so much, we know why this is funny, and it's funny to about 10 people on the set, but actually it translates quite nicely at home because it's funny animals. So yeah, I just absolutely love this song. I thought it's quite a fast song for a puppet to be able to, like, you know, like, it's quite ambitious because he's got to mouth those words. So I thought it was quite fast for a poor old Scooter, but he does well. Yeah, I love the lion and the bird features, which is that real kind of like trope of Muppet songs of like, there'll be a kind of lead singer, and then something will pop in from the left and pop in from the right. That's kind of how it has to be, and then they disappear and then they come back, so you kind of get used to them. I particularly, it's not really about the song, but I particularly enjoyed the video for this, because it's just the set. It's basically just a black tarp over some boxes with some holes for the worms. Like, there's nothing more to it, and I love that. And I really like the worm breakdown, actually, like at the end, when it kind of like focuses on the sounds of the worms. It kind of sounds a bit like manic laughing, really.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like the Stranglers song we talked about, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, it is. What were you going to say, Jeanette? What were you going to...
Well, first, that's the first time the Muppets and the Stranglers might have had a comparison, so my absolute hats go off to you. But that sort of whole charming amateurishness of the Muppets is just like, I just absolutely adore that. The idea that things are just sort of, it's totally the spirit in which Jim Henson started it. So it was literally, he wanted to get into show business and he put on a sort of sock, cut a ping pong ball in half, and there was Kermit, and he named it Kermit, and he did that on his table in his teens, and it was just like that spirit. Even though like a lot of other stuff obviously happened, it got a lot more sophisticated, but it was just like, it's just beautiful. It's just totally beautiful.
And you're right, like it doesn't get played a lot now. Like I know there's like a modern version of Sesame Street and things, but the actual Muppet is in the Muppet Show. Like they bring out the odd film and stuff, but the actual sort of like series of the show, you're right, it's really hard, it's just not really on. And this kind of, the narrative's taken a bit of a weird turn now, hasn't it? Like, aren't Miss Piggy and Kermit supposed to be divorced or something? Or
I've got no time for that.
No,
I know.
Time
for that.
I'm like, no, but they work backstage on the show together in the Muppet Show, and then it's chaos, and then they save it. That's what they do. So yeah, I just thought this was an amazing song, and I implore everybody to look this up. What would they search for on YouTube to find this? Is it just
Muppets, there's a new sound.
Yeah.
We'll put a link in as well.
We'll put a link in, yeah, do it. Jack, because me and Jack don't... I think you did have the Muppets and Sesame Street, but possibly not as much in your life.
No, not really. And that's the thing. I think it sounds like that childhood connection is really important, because I don't feel like I have gone back to explore the Muppets. I'm aware that Lizzie's super into the Muppets, and I feel like that there is something there, and I think if I had that thread going back, I probably would be all over it, but I don't. But this was, I had a great time with this, and I think things like this give me an insight into the fact that the Muppets has so much going on, which is more than just entertaining kids. I mean, as you say, plucking this novelty song out from nowhere and plugging it in front of people. I mean, it's an utterly like nonsense, wonderful 2 minutes. My favourite bits, I have favourite bits and I have bits that unsettle me. So my favourite bits are the fact that the bird and the lion, when they come in, they don't change. Like the tone of their interjections is the same. Like there could have been comedic value in doing something different, but I think there's more comedic value in sticking to like the sheer simplicity, the raw simplicity of the novelty song by just barking like in the exact same tone every time. It also reminds me of, on the new Alan Partridge, there's a point where Alan barks like a dog at his co-host and scares her. Which is, but it felt exactly like that anytime the lion came in, which is great. I was unsettled by the sight of worms made of felt, like that when they started pushing up through the set. There's something about that texture which really set my stomach on edge, but that's on me. And also it's a visual thing as well, so not in the song. I also just think as well, and this seems to be, and again, you'll know more about this than I do, but in the song, I mean, obviously it's got this repetitious nature, and it feels like it's kind of getting more intense. I mean, obviously it's rising in pitch every time they repeat it, and the worms are coming out the woodwork like more and more and getting louder and louder. And when Muppets like stop doing their thing, they do their song or whatever, they do this thing where they nod and smile in quite a frantic way, which always looks like a cry for help to me. And I felt, particularly when he's covered in worms at the end, it felt like, obviously, delighted that he's finished the song, but also like a help me kind of vibe, which and it was almost like that through this novelty song, which feels quite innocuous and quite inane, it has this chant-like quality because you're saying the same thing over and over. It's like he'd summoned the worms out of the earth and was like, I'm in over my head here. That's what it felt like to me. So I thought I got a lot out of it, basically.
Excellent. And like worms, it's about death and decay as well.
Yes.
So at the start of the song in the sketch, there's like two puppets overground, and like they're having a nice picnic, and then you go underground and there's Scooter and the worms, and they're all taking over.
Yes.
It's like and bear with me here, it's like one of those Renaissance portraits where you've got a skull in the corner.
Yes.
It's like, you are gone, mate. Give it 50 years, you are gone. We are all done dust and the wind.
Yeah,
but that's the best thing about specifically the Muppet Show, and a little bit Sesame Street as well. You watch it back now and you're like, whoa, that's harsh. I know there's a certain scene where Big Bird is telling a kid Big Bird tries to cross the road, and it isn't at the lights, and one of the characters is like,
so
Big Bird, what are you doing? And he's like, oh well, I was just crossing the road. And he's like, I'll remember to look next time. And the character goes, might not be a next time. And it's so dark good. And it's serious. But the Muppets has always had that. It's never ever been sugary. It's always been real, but you can tell the people behind it just have a very pure sense of comedy and what was funny, and they didn't need funny to be the same as nice.
Yes. I also like as well, going back to the origin of this song, obviously, as you said, Jeanette, it was like people trying to make serious music and getting annoyed that novelty songs that were deliberately bad, were getting more traction. I love the idea that the new sound, like the new thing that everyone's listening to, is the sound of worms, like the lowest form of sound in a sort of, it's like a little jibe at popular music, it felt like, as well, which is nice.
See, I hadn't even made that connection, but that might actually be very, very true as well. I think Tony Borello, the songwriter, was, a super smart man, so I'm sure there was like a sort of sense of despair about it as well, which is maybe carried through all of these versions as well.
Absolutely.
Who knew this recommendation would go into death and despair? But hey.
That's the wonder of the Muppets, apparently.
It's been one of my favourites of the whole podcast ever. So
what an accolade.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's a new sound, the newest sound around, the strangest sound that you have ever heard. Not like a wild boar or a jungle lion's roar. It isn't like the cry of any bird. But there's a new sound, it's deep down in the ground, and everyone who listens to it squirms, because it's new sound. So deep down in the ground is the sound that's made by worms. There's a new sound, the newest sound.
Well, we've got one more track, and Lizzie, it's yours.
Yeah, so my track is the Joubert Singers. I hope I'm saying that correctly. It's called Stand on the Word. This is I've got to say this, is the original version from 1985. There is a version from 1982, and I think people that are really into this particular song get quite particular about, well, there's that version and there's this version. So if you're looking it up, I'm looking at the 1985 version. Doesn't mean a lot to me, but I think it will to very few people. Right, so this is a really funky religious song. It starts with this kind of lovely jangly high piano intro, and then some organ comes in, and then a choir comes in, and then and until that point you think, okay, so this has connotations of being some religious music, something that's quite uplifting and upbeat, but then the bass kind of comes in and betrays the whole thing, and you're like, this is a funk song. So it just goes into this really, really catchy song, which you are singing away, because it is funky, it's got drums, it's got really, really like lovely bass, and it's got this kind of like I want to say like almost like honky piano, but not quite. And it's got some synths in there as well. I think bongos at some point. So you're singing along and having this really lovely funky time, and then you're kind of like, wait, what are they saying? Because you realise it's a choir. And actually the lyrics are things like, we must not question the good Lord. And then they go on to say, like, we don't know how, we don't know when, but we must not question the Lord. And then you sort of go, oh, okay. Now, I'm not a religious person, so I find that a little bit unsettling, because I am having a funky old time. But no, I think it's just a really well put together song. And I think when they made this song, they got it so right, because it's that really explosive combo of sort of unwielding gospel and faith music, which makes you want to kind of, there's something innate in you that wants to make you get up and sing and go, yeah, and feel something, feel a religion or a higher level with, it's got the DNA of a funk song, which no one can resist in the world ever. So what you've got is a kind of really strong arsenal of musical tricks coming at you, and before you know it, you're singing about not questioning the Lord. So
I feel like you've been tricked.
Yeah. And I think it's a great song. This came to my attention because I caught a snippet of it on BBC Radio 1 a few weeks ago, and I think there's been quite a few DJs recently and in the past that have remixed it. I think it's on a Just East track as well a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think over the years it has been used in certain things, but I found it really nice to kind of go back to the original and listen to it, because this is a really strong song. So strong you won't know what you're doing. So that's my song. Jeanette, what did you think to this one?
Well, I agree with you. I think it is an incredibly strong song. I think it's got a beauty and a grace to it, as well as the funk, which makes it sort of quite finely balanced. And I don't think that only comes from the lyrics. I think that comes from this sort of honking piano, pounding piano. But this sounds like a contradiction in terms, but there's a delicacy to it as well, which I find, because it's very, very graceful and beautiful, as well as being very, very funky as well. And I think that one of the things I really liked about the song is, it's funk, it's disco, it's gospel, and it makes the kind of distinctions between them kind of meaningless. And the other thing that I found, because I'd not heard of it before you recommended it, Lizzie, which I felt a little bit ashamed, because I did think I knew quite a lot of disco stuff and I didn't know this at all. And so I was very, very happy to find it. And I sort of found out that it was sort of originally this kind of private press thing, which a lot of religious records are.
Yes.
And the great thing about when you find these is this is what sort of crate diggers love, isn't it? These kind of vanity presses that are just pressed in some kind of suburb of Chicago, and they can find it and they just cream all over it, and it's really, really great. And when it's brought to the wider world like this. The other thing that's really cool about these private presses is, so you mentioned that I wrote this book, Seasons They Change, about sort of folk and psychedelic music. One of the things that you'd see there was a lot of private presses, like the late 70s, doing sort of folk versions of Christian stuff. They would press 99 copies to get around the tax laws and stuff like that. And all of these things, they sounded like they were made almost like 4 years earlier. And to a certain extent, this does as well. It sounds like solidly 1978 when it was later, but that kind of adds to the charm of it a little bit, that it's just sort of a little bit out of time, but it's still so beautiful, it's so heartfelt. And the nearest thing I could think that it reminded me of, from a gospel and a really irresistible point of view, was about sort of in the late 90s, there was this track, this pop song, Shackles Praise You by Mary Mary. I don't know if either of you remember it.
I don't.
No, I don't think so.
You should look it up. It was one of the best singles of that year. I think it was 99. I told you I like girl groups. They were Two Sisters London, I think. And it was just this really joyous gospel song, which sounded solidly in the pop of the day, or maybe a few years earlier. And you will listen to it and you will have the same experience. Like I'm singing about sort of getting rid of the shackles, and I just want to praise you. And before you realise it, you're just like completely off on a devotional tip without any inner feeling, just like the sort of
I want that
desire
feeling.
to move and things like that. So that was the nearest thing that I could think to sort of compare it to, and I absolutely loved it, and I will just listen to it frequently from now on, I think, because it's a really, really solid track.
Oh, I love it when that happens on this podcast, because I'm now going to check out that Mary Mary song, because that sounds really good. And this is the nicest thing about this, is you suddenly you find these songs where you're like, how have I gone 30 years on this planet and this has not come to me? Like, this, you need other people to do some work for you, don't you? It's,
absolutely.
It's brilliant. Jack, what did you make of it? Are you standing on the word?
Yeah, I'm standing on top of it as well, if there's room. I mean, I've got, obviously you guys both give a wonderful recap there, I think, of why it's such a sweet song. And I mean, I love this kind of slide and snap of the piano, the way that kind of jags out the beat. That's brilliant, and obviously it feels like a big part of why it's such dance floor fuel is the fact that piano is really doing a lot of work. Love the vocals. I think the harmony that comes in to begin with, where it's just that big old vowel that just hangs there, and then there's other vocals like coming in as well, where it's got that ooh like at the start, is really cool. It's quite a strange effect. Like the harmonies are just completely like oblivious to what the other vocals are doing. And I also really like as well the fact that the vocals feel like that they've got a really strong echo on them that isn't really present on anything else in the track. And it did feel like almost like a church echo. And it comes in particular when it just goes down to one voice. And I don't know, I mean, do we know? Was it any of it recorded in a church at all? Is that clear? Don't know.
It wasn't clear in my research, but it would be a good guess.
Yeah,
I mean,
it felt it certainly felt like it, which I felt like it really came through on headphones. But I think also it probably contributes quite nicely to the energy of the track as a whole. And it's kind of bizarre that it sounds so cohesive when you've got like big old church echo and then a band that sounds like they're all jamming it out in close quarters, which is really cool. What I love is, and we talked about obviously I was going to say devotional slant, but obviously it's all very devotional, this song, but you've got a kind of descending motif where you've got the da 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 da, and then you've got the chorus which kind of goes up where it's like na 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 da da, which I really like. You've got this pulling down and also this transporting upward as well, which felt like quite a nice element in a song about religion and spirituality, and you know, the energies up there, which I thought was fabulous. There is definitely a sense that the song's kind of climbing out of itself. Love it. I had never heard this song before. I love its weird relationship with space, like I said, and I mean, I would definitely listen to this again. I think it holds up over a car stereo and headphones equally as well, which is fabulous.
Yeah, I mean, I'm intrigued that it was on Radio 1 a few weeks ago, which is how it came to my attention, because it must be about to be in somebody's remix or something. I wonder whether this is about to become quite big, or I can't remember who was playing it. It might have been Annie Mac, and I think she was just talking about how much she plays it as like a bit of a floor filler at the start of the night. Okay. But it does make me wonder whether it's coming to us soon in a different format.
Radio 1, I mean, you might expect to hear this, not wishing to put things in silos, but you might sort of expect to hear this more on Six Music rather than Radio 1.
Exactly.
Totally, yeah.
So
because I almost thought it was, because we have the sort of rule is we have Six Music on in the house, and then in my car I have Radio 1 because I like the kind of inaneness of it. It helps me drive better because it's just kind of it's simple. So it was definitely Radio 1, which you're so right. It does sound like maybe like one of the Sunday morning shows where it's a real kind of like obscurity that comes out. But it's I don't know. The thing is, I think me and Jack, it's difficult because when we do this podcast, we have this rule where we do not speak to each other about the tracks before we come on the podcast, because that's where all the good stuff needs to be. But it's been very hard because both of us have been singing this song for the last kind of few days.
Substituting our cat's name in with the Lord and stuff like that. So
there's a lot of blasphemy every single there, song. Possibly.
Yes, that's probably not great in some people's eyes, but hey.
What's your cat's name?
Maggie,
Mags. Yeah.
Magpuss.
Yeah.
Really.
A lot of options there, really.
Yeah.
Do you want to
it can almost fit into any song.
Exactly.
It can. Well, I was just thinking, if she's into the Muppets, she'll get the Magpuss thing. So,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Nice. Jeanette, thank you so much for coming and speaking about these tracks with us. This has been thoroughly
Thank
enlightening.
you.
And you, as Lizzie mentioned, have written some books, some wonderful books. So Fearless, The Making of Post-Rock, and also Seasons They Change, the story of acid and psychedelic folk. So if people are interested in checking out those books and keeping up to speed with what you're doing as well, where's the best place for them to be headed?
You can either go to my Twitter, which is just Jeanette Leech, and you will find me. Or if for more info on my books, my publisher is Jawbone, who've put both of them out, Jawbone Press. And again, you can just find them very, very easily online. And they're both great. And so you should read them.
Cool. Nice.
They absolutely are.
I worked really hard on them, and you should read them.
Absolutely. And, if they're anywhere as near as eloquent as everything you've just said, then everybody needs to be getting these books now. This has been brilliant. So, Jack, where can people find out more about us and the podcast?
Yeah, so people can go to the podcast website, which is fantasticbeatspodcast.com. We're on Twitter at fantastic_pod, and you can send us an email at hello@fantasticbeatspodcast.com.
Awesome. This has been great. You've all been great. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.